At exactly 10 o'clock on Christmas morning, my son slammed a door in my face. Not just any door. The front door of the mansion I had secretly bought for him. He stood behind it wearing a velvet jacket, expensive watch flashing beneath the chandelier, and looked at me as if I were a stranger. "You're not family anymore," he said coldly. "Go away, old man." Behind him, his wife, Vanessa, covered a laugh with her hand. Her parents, Richard and Elaine, stood beside the Christmas tree, raising champagne glasses as though they were celebrating my humiliation. I stood there holding a 20-pound turkey. I had spent 6 hours roasting it using my late wife's Christmas recipe. For 40 years, my wife Margaret had seasoned that turkey the same way. Even after she passed, I kept the tradition alive. That morning, I had thought I was bringing my son a piece of his mother. Instead, I was treated like garbage. My name is Walter Hayes. I was 70 years old. And my son, Ethan, had just made the biggest mistake of his life. I didn't argue. I didn't beg. I simply nodded. Then I carried that turkey to the trash and dropped it inside. I climbed into my 20-year-old Ford, closed the door, and stared at Ethan's number on my phone. My thumb hovered over it. Then I scrolled past his name. I stopped on another. Marcus Reed. My oldest friend. My lawyer. And the only man who knew exactly what my son didn't. I pressed call. "Marcus," I said quietly, "the asset has become hostile." There was a long silence. Then he asked, "Are you sure?" I looked through the windshield at the mansion. I've never been more sure of anything. "Then we're activating Protocol Zero." "Do it. Walter, once I start, there is no putting everything back." "I know." I ended the call. I didn't drive away. I wanted to watch. Because Ethan believed he had just thrown an old laborer out of his home. He had no idea he had just declared war on the man who owned the ground beneath his feet. 15 minutes later, the first caterer stumbled outside. Then another. The music stopped. A minute later, 3 black repossession trucks turned into the driveway. Ethan opened the door. His confident expression disappeared. A massive man named Frank Dalton, who managed my construction fleet, walked toward him carrying a folder. "Ethan Hayes?" "Yes?" Frank opened the folder. "T&H Holdings has orders to repossess the Mercedes and Lexus." Ethan laughed nervously. "You've got the wrong house." Frank shook his head. "No, we have exactly the right house." The first hook dropped beneath the Mercedes. Vanessa screamed. Richard stopped smiling. Elaine lowered her champagne glass, and Ethan finally looked toward the street. That was when he saw my old Ford, driving slowly past the mansion. Our eyes met. For the first time, confusion appeared on his face. He was beginning to understand. But he still had no idea how deep the truth went. And this was only the beginning. If you've ever been betrayed by someone you sacrificed everything for, hit that like button, subscribe, and stay with me. Because what happened next turned one Christmas insult into the most devastating lesson my son had ever received. The Mercedes disappeared first. Then the Lexus. Both were lifted from the driveway, while Ethan stood frozen in his socks. Vanessa called the police. She expected officers to arrive and protect them. Instead, Sergeant Daniel Cole examined the paperwork, checked the registered owner, and looked directly at Ethan. "You need to step aside. But those are our cars." "No," the sergeant replied. "According to these documents, they're not." Richard's face turned pale. "You told us you owned them." Ethan didn't answer. He couldn't. As the tow trucks disappeared, I drove to my bank. I had another call to make. Within minutes, every luxury account connected to Ethan's lifestyle was frozen. His platinum card, his wife's black card, their private accounts, their household credit. Everything. That afternoon, the caterer tried charging the remaining $15,000 bill. Declined. Vanessa's card was next. Declined. The guests who had laughed at me suddenly remembered they had somewhere else to be. One by one, they left. The mansion became silent. That evening I sat alone in my small duplex. Ethan used to call it a dungeon. The carpet was old. The furniture was simple. Nothing in the place looked impressive. But behind a painting of a lighthouse sat a hidden safe. Inside was a ledger. 10 years of payments. School tuition. Cars, travel, business investments. Luxury apartments. More than $2.5 million. I had funded Ethan's life. Not because I wanted him to worship me. Because I wanted him to have opportunities I never had. I had spent decades working before sunrise, laying pipes, buying neglected properties, and slowly building businesses. Eventually, those businesses became Hayes Holdings. Ethan knew nothing about it. He thought the money simply came from somewhere. The next morning, he and Vanessa arrived at my duplex. They looked exhausted. Ethan didn't apologize. He walked inside and demanded, "Fix this, Dad." I looked at him. "Excuse me? You know exactly what I mean. Restore the accounts. Get the cars back. Tell your people to stop." I almost laughed. "Your people?" Vanessa folded her arms. "This is jealousy. You never liked our lifestyle." I stared at her. Then Ethan made the mistake that changed everything. This money was Mom's inheritance. I reached into a drawer and pulled out Margaret's probate documents. Her estate had been worth approximately $2,400. I placed the papers on the table. "Your mother's inheritance was this." Ethan stared. "The rest came from me." He shook his head. "You're lying. 50 years of waking up at 4 in the morning isn't an inheritance." I paused. "You've been receiving a paycheck from me for years." His expression changed. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you're fired." Vanessa stepped forward. "You can't do this." "Oh, I can." When they refused to leave, I picked up the garden hose. They backed toward the door. "Dad, don't." I opened the door. Out. A cold stream of water sent them stumbling into the snow. But Ethan wasn't finished. By noon, he returned with a cheap lawyer named Harold Pike. He threatened lawsuits, financial coercion, assault, everything he could think of. Then Marcus Reed walked into my dining room. 6'4", charcoal suit, calm expression. He placed a folder on the table. "Your client isn't a homeowner," Marcus told Harold. Harold blinked. "He's a tenant." Ethan's face went white. "Monthly lease. $1. Marcus smiled. "The family discount is revoked." He slid another document across the table. "New rent. $8,000 per month." Vanessa stared at Ethan. "You told me this house was paid off." Ethan said nothing. And for the first time, Vanessa looked at my son not as a successful man, but as a liar. That night, Vanessa went online. She filmed herself crying. She called me controlling, cruel, vindictive. Then she accused me of destroying their lives because of racial prejudice. Thousands of strangers watched. People who didn't know me called me names. Some threatened me. At 2 in the morning, a brick crashed through my window. A note was tied around it. "Leave her alone." For 3 days, my house felt like a prison. My garage was spray painted. Neighbors avoided eye contact. Marcus wanted to file lawsuits. I refused. "Silence isn't weakness," I told him. "Sometimes it's patience." Instead, I hired an investigator. His name was Caleb Stone. He had once been a detective before his career collapsed. He knew how to find things people desperately wanted hidden. 3 days later, he returned with a folder. "Vanessa's parents aren't wealthy." I looked up. "What?" "Richard and Elaine are bankrupt." Caleb spread photographs across the table. Eviction notices. Unpaid debts. Failed businesses. They had been living off Ethan's money. They weren't protecting my son. They were feeding from him. Then Ethan arrived again. He looked terrible. Unshaven, hoodie, desperate. He held out an ultrasound picture. "Dad." I stared at it. "Vanessa's pregnant." For a moment, my anger weakened. A child. My grandchild. Maybe I had been wrong to shut the door completely. I reached for my checkbook. Then something inside me stopped. I called the clinic listed on the image. There was no pregnancy. The image was a stock photograph. The paperwork was forged. I stared at Ethan. "You lied about your own child." He didn't even look ashamed. Instead, his face hardened. "You have millions." His voice rose. "And you live like a rat." I felt something inside me go completely still. "If I have to lie to get what's mine," he said, "I will." I stood. "You're done." But desperation made Ethan dangerous. A week later, he and Richard attempted to sell one of my commercial properties. They forged a deed. They forged my signature. Then they sold the 5-acre lot for $50,000. What they didn't know was that the buyer wasn't a stranger. He was Victor Grant, my head of acquisitions. The entire transaction was a sting. Every conversation had been recorded. Every signature had been filmed. Ethan had just committed felony forgery. But even that wasn't enough. They launched something worse. A guardianship petition. They edited videos to make me look confused and violent. Then they convinced a judge I was mentally unstable. One afternoon, officers arrived at my home. They took me to St. Catherine's Hospital for an emergency psychiatric evaluation. I didn't fight. I didn't scream. I simply went. Because I understood something Ethan didn't. When someone wants you to look unstable, anger is their greatest weapon. So I stayed calm. A doctor named Dr. Nolan Vance tried to force medication on me. I pretended to swallow the pills. Instead, I hid them. That night I heard voices outside my room. Ethan and Dr. Vance, you promised the diagnosis, Ethan whispered. I need 30,000. You'll get it after I have power of attorney. Then came the words that made my blood run cold. Call it dementia. I had already prepared for betrayal. A recorder was hidden beneath my bed. Every word was captured. 48 hours later, Marcus arrived with federal agents and a court order. Dr. Vance was arrested before he could finish another sentence. Ethan had crossed the final line. Now I wasn't going to punish him. I was going to let the truth punish him. After I left the hospital, I made one phone call. Terminate Ethan's position. Marcus didn't ask questions. He already knew. Ethan had been working as a senior vice president at a marketing company. What he didn't know was that I owned it. I had created the position years earlier because I wanted my son to have purpose. He believed his success came from his own brilliance. He never realized the entire ladder beneath him had been built by his father. The next morning, security walked into his office. Mr. Hayes, you need to come with us. What? Your employment has been terminated. Ethan laughed. You can't fire me. The security guard handed him an envelope. Apparently they can. He was escorted outside. No car, no job, no credit, no mansion. For the first time in his adult life, Ethan had nothing between himself and reality. Vanessa reacted differently. She began searching for another source of money. Then she contacted an old wealthy boyfriend. His name was Julian Cross. Except Julian wasn't really an old boyfriend. He was an actor. I had hired him. He invited Vanessa to a luxury suite and told her exactly what she wanted to hear. Money, protection, a new life. All she had to do was attend a charity gala. She agreed immediately. That same evening, Ethan crashed the gala. He found a microphone. Hundreds of wealthy guests turned toward him. My father destroyed my family. He played the victim perfectly. My own father wants me homeless. People whispered. Cameras turned toward him. For a moment, Ethan thought he had won. Then the giant screen behind him changed. Security footage appeared. Vanessa laughing with Julian. Flirting, talking about leaving Ethan. Then came audio. Ethan's own voice. He had been recorded discussing Vanessa's parents. Their leeches. The ballroom became silent. Then the next recording played. He described his plans to take my money. To discard everyone once he had control. Richard lunged toward Ethan. You said you were going to save us. Ethan shoved him away. Vanessa screamed. The guests backed away. Security rushed in. And for the first time, the story Ethan had told the world collapsed in front of everyone. But he still wasn't finished. 3 nights later, desperation turned into violence. At midnight, my apartment was silent. Then I heard glass break. Footsteps. A drawer being ripped open. I stayed in the dark. Ethan entered holding a kitchen knife. He tore through furniture. He ripped apart Margaret's lighthouse painting. Where's the safe? He screamed. Where's the money? I stepped into the doorway. He froze. Beside me stood the police chief. The lights came on. Ethan dropped the knife. For several seconds, nobody moved. Then the chief said, Ethan Hayes, you're under arrest. Breaking and entering. Armed robbery. Assault. The list continued. I watched my son put his hands behind his back. The same hands that once held mine as a child. The same hands that had just raised a knife against me. And for the first time, I understood something painful. Revenge wasn't about destroying my son. It was about finally stopping him from destroying himself. I visited Ethan in jail. He looked smaller. Not physically. Spiritually, his expensive clothes were gone. His watch was gone. His confidence was gone. He sat behind the glass with hollow eyes. Dad, I said nothing. Please, still nothing. Then he started blaming everyone. Vanessa, Richard, Elaine, his lawyer, the investigator. Everyone except himself. Finally, I placed a document on the table. A plea agreement. He stared at it. You'll serve 2 years for the forgery. His eyes widened. And in exchange, I'll withdraw the robbery and assault charges. Why? Because I want one thing from you. What? Testify against Richard. Ethan hesitated. For the first time, he had to choose between protecting the people who had helped corrupt him and saving himself. He signed. Richard was later charged for orchestrating the land fraud. But Vanessa wasn't finished. She had watched Ethan lose everything. Now she blamed me. One night, at 3 a.m, my security cameras detected movement. Vanessa approached my porch carrying a gasoline container. She poured it across the wooden steps. Then she pulled out a lighter. She didn't know I had spent 30 years designing fire suppression systems. My home was protected. The moment she raised the lighter, hidden nozzles activated. A massive cloud of fire-retardant foam erupted across the porch. Vanessa fell backward. Floodlights illuminated the entire property. She was trapped beneath the foam, the gasoline container beside her. Police arrived within minutes. There was no mystery, no complicated investigation. The cameras had recorded everything. Vanessa was arrested. Months later, the case went to trial. The defense tried to portray me as a wealthy tyrant, a miser, a father who had supposedly starved his own son of opportunity. Then Marcus stood before the jury. He asked me one question. What is your approximate net worth? I looked across the courtroom. 12 shopping centers, municipal contracts, residential developments, construction holdings. I paused. Approximately $62 million. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Ethan stared at me. 62 million. He had spent his entire life believing his father was poor. He had mocked my old truck, my worn clothes, my small duplex. He thought those things meant weakness. He never understood that wealth doesn't always announce itself. Sometimes it wears work boots. Sometimes it drives a 20-year-old truck. Sometimes it lives quietly because it has nothing left to prove. But I wasn't finished. Marcus handed me another document. I turned toward the judge. There's one more matter. Years earlier, I had created a trust in Margaret's name. I had already transferred 80% of my assets into it. $50 million. Not for Ethan. For scholarships. For children who had talent but no money. For young people who needed the opportunities I had once worked so hard to give my son. Ethan's face went pale. He finally understood. He hadn't just lost access to my money. He had lost the inheritance he had been counting on his entire life. He collapsed into his chair. And I didn't feel triumph. I felt something quieter. Sadness. Because the greatest punishment wasn't that Ethan had lost millions. It was that he finally understood how much his father had loved him, only after he had destroyed it. 1 year later, I returned to Oakview Drive. On Christmas morning. But the mansion looked completely different. The expensive decorations were gone. The catered tables were gone. The luxury cars were gone. The mansion had become the Margaret Hayes Community Center. Children ran through the halls wearing paper crowns. Students who had received scholarships from Margaret's trust decorated a giant Christmas tree. There was music, laughter, homemade food. No champagne glasses raised in mockery. No one looked down on anyone else. At the center of the room sat my old friend Marcus wearing a ridiculous Santa hat. He spotted me and raised a glass. To family. I smiled. The family we choose. That was when I realized something. A house is just walls. Money is just numbers. A family isn't created by a last name. It's created by respect, by loyalty, by showing up when nobody is watching, by remembering who stood beside you before you had anything. That evening I sat beside the fireplace. A letter had arrived from prison. The handwriting immediately told me who had written it. Ethan. I opened it slowly. His words were different now. No excuses, no demands, no accusations, just regret. He wrote that he had spent his entire life believing he deserved everything. He wrote that he had confused generosity with weakness. He wrote that he had finally understood something his mother had tried to teach him when he was young. You don't measure love by what someone gives you. You measure it by what they are willing to sacrifice for you. Then came the final line. I lost everything because I never understood what I had. I read the letter twice. For the first time in months, I didn't feel anger. I felt tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep fixes, the kind that comes after carrying pain for too long. I held the letter near the fireplace. The corner caught first, then the flame climbed across the page. The ink disappeared, the paper curled, and eventually the entire letter became ash. Marcus walked into the room carrying 2 glasses. You could have kept it. I watched the final ember disappear. I don't need it. He sat beside me. Do you forgive him? I thought about that. Forgiveness isn't always opening the door again. Sometimes forgiveness means refusing to carry hatred into tomorrow. I love him, I finally said. Marcus looked at me. But I won't rescue him from the consequences of his choices. I stared into the fire. Maybe that's the only way he'll ever become a man. Outside, snow began falling. The same kind of snow that had covered Ethan's driveway when he threw me out. Only this time nobody was laughing at me. Nobody was calling me old. Nobody was telling me I didn't belong. I belonged exactly where I was, among people who respected me, among children who were building futures because of Margaret's name, and surrounded by a family that had been built not by blood, but by gratitude. For the first time since Margaret died, Christmas didn't feel like something I had to survive. It felt like something I could finally enjoy the following Christmas. I returned to the community center again. The children had grown attached to me. One called me Grandpa Walter. Another asked if I would help him fix a broken toy truck. I sat on the floor with him, tightening a tiny screw with an old screwdriver. He looked up at me. Did you build things before this? I smiled. Most of my life. What did you build? I looked around the room, at the scholarship students, at the Christmas decorations, at the people laughing together. I built a lot of things, I said. But this might be the one I'm proudest of. That night, another letter arrived from prison. Ethan wrote again. This time, there was no mention of money, no mention of cars, no mention of the mansion. He asked about the community center. He asked whether Margaret's scholarship program was helping children. Then he asked a simple question. Do you think someday I could earn your forgiveness? I didn't answer immediately. I sat beside the fireplace and thought about the boy he used to be. The little boy who once fell asleep holding my finger. The teenager who waited by the window for me to come home. The young man I had tried to protect from every hardship. Somewhere along the way, that boy had disappeared beneath greed, pride, and entitlement. But maybe he wasn't gone forever. Maybe he was buried, waiting for consequences to force him to look inward. I folded the letter. I didn't send money. I didn't call the prison. I didn't ask anyone to shorten his sentence. Instead, I wrote one sentence. Become someone your mother would be proud to meet. That was all. Because love doesn't always mean saving someone from the fire. Sometimes love means letting them feel the heat long enough to understand why they walked into it. I placed the letter in an envelope. Then I looked at Margaret's photograph above the fireplace. You were right, I whispered. She had always believed Ethan could become a good man. I just wished he had listened before he lost everything. Later that night, Marcus joined me. He poured 2 glasses. To Margaret. I raised mine. To Margaret. Then he smiled. And to family. I thought about Ethan's words that Christmas morning. You are no longer family. He had believed family was something he could remove with a sentence. He was wrong. Family isn't a door someone else controls. It isn't a mansion. It isn't money. It isn't a bloodline. Family is earned through respect. And sometimes the people who share your blood are the ones who teach you the hardest lesson of all. I had spent years trying to give my son everything. Money, security, opportunity, a future. In the end, the only thing I could give him that mattered was consequences. And perhaps that was the greatest gift I had ever given him. Because a person who never faces consequences never learns responsibility. A person who is always rescued never learns to stand. And sometimes the most loving thing a parent can do is step back, let the child fall, and wait to see whether they finally learn how to stand. So if this story touched something inside you, hit that like button, subscribe to Dad's Cold Revenge, and tell me in the comments, would you have forgiven Ethan after everything he did? And remember, real family isn't always the family you're born into. Sometimes, it's the family you build.